Hey guys, BuildZoid here, and today we're going to be doing a video about overclocking a GPU that's super irrelevant, but it basically covers some basic principles of like BIOS modding for Polaris cards, so, you know, you might be able to apply what I do here to other GPUs, but today what we're going to be overclocking is a Radeon Pro Duo, so, yeah. Blue drivers, and the blue drivers are basically the AMD Radeon Pro drivers. And so the problem with this is that these Pro drivers, first of all, we don't have Crossfire enabled, so that's an issue. We need to fix that. No point having a Pro Duo if you're not going to run it in Crossfire. Okay, so that's up now, and there's a couple issues with this card, and the main one for me with overclocking this card is that basically, as far as I can tell, the driver just doesn't have an overclocking API. It just like this is it. That's all of the Wattman functionality you get. And the thing is, even if you start something like Overdrive NTool, which somebody suggested that I try use, so here we have Overdrive NTool, and if we just do something like 1300, right? And then we hit apply, you just get this error telling you that the driver, like, there's the basically whatever Overdrive NTool is trying to do, well, the driver doesn't support it. So as far as I can tell, the API that is normally used for overclocking AMD GPUs through the driver just doesn't exist on the Pro driver, so you can't do anything because the utility basically normally it works is the utility tells the driver that the driver should tell the card to overclock, okay? But here the driver isn't listening, so essentially you're kind of stuck with like, okay, so you can't overclock from the driver. So the only way to overclock one of these that I've been able to figure out is to basically just do BIOS mods. And so we're going to do that. Yeah, if somebody knows, like an easy fix for this would be for somebody to just figure out how to put an AMD Pro series GPU onto the gaming drivers. Because if you could run this on the gaming drivers, that would solve all the issues, because the gaming drivers have overclocking support, but this doesn't. Anyway, so the first thing we need to do if we're going to be modding the BIOS on a Pro series card is we need to run ATI Pixel Clock Patcher. That's the name of the utility, but it works both for AMD and ATI cards. This originally was created to like patch the pixel clock so that you can overclock your monitor higher. But the primary reason why we're using it here is the BIOS signature check right here. And so we're going to just patch that. Now if we open it again, okay, well, no, we're going to have to reopen it. There. Now it'll tell us already patched, and basically what that does is it removes the BIOS signature check. When we modify the BIOS, the driver will still, the driver will just ignore it. This is, for like RX 500 series cards, you don't need to do this as far as I know. For RX 400 series, I think you do. It's kind of a bit of a mess, but basically with some cards you might need to use this, with other cards you don't. I think if you're doing, if you're trying to overclock any Pro series card, you're probably going to need this because it's the Pro driver, right? Like it's going to have all of the safety features enabled, which is part of why there's no overclocking support. Anyway, I think at this point it might be a good idea to just run the card at stock and see how it does, but yeah, like we have, low memory clock and all of that. We're going to open up the sensors. And we're just going to run some good old 3D Mark Firestrike. This thing's not quite fast enough to max out. Like, this thing is actually surprisingly slow. Like, as far as I'm concerned, it is surprisingly slow. So I'm just going to run some Firestrike quickly. Just the first two tests, I'm going to hit escape once they finish. So that we at least have a baseline to compare against about how much progress I make with the BIOS mods, because, yeah, we can make this thing go a hell of a lot faster. And we also have the... Oops, I just forgot something. So if you're going to be using GPU-Z for monitoring, you're going to have to... Yeah, there. Now it's showing two different cards. Anyway, we can start the benchmark again. Fire strike, run. And I could have disabled this. I'm not sure why I haven't. So yeah, I mean, like, this really isn't very fast. And kind of the main restrictions on this card, I guess, are, well, it's a combination of basically like power limit and the clocks and just, but mostly the power limit, which we're obviously going to lift. But when it actually comes to BIOS modding this card, you run into a lot of issues, even with the BIOS mods, which is kind of unfortunate. You basically, you can't, the voltage control is a bit of a mess. Because essentially if you try set the voltage in the BIOS higher than 1200 millivolts, the card will actually just shut down on you as soon as you run any workload. So that seems to be an over voltage protection that kicks in, which is super annoying. Obviously a hard mod would not run into that, but yeah, it's just like if you're doing it from software, then you're going to bounce off the over voltage protection. Now theoretically that should be removable if you just had if you knew which register on the IR3567B sets over voltage protection, you could disable that very, very easily. Currently don't have the resources to do that. Also, the voltage control seems to be a bit of a mess, so we're just going to escape out of that. We're going to see our score, but I also want to see what kind of operating parameters. Oh my god, that is awful. Like, that is awful. There's no defense for that. That's just miserable. Okay, so, yeah, as you can see, the card is just not even running. Like, the thing is spec'd to 1243 boost, and this is one of the few cards where AMD's boost clock is an actual boost clock because the power limit is set super low. So, basically, the average power consumption is set to be, like, below 95 watts or something, so... The end result is that, like, if I set it average, then it's averaging everything that's been recorded, not just the Fire Strike runs. But if it was just averaging the Fire Strike tests, then it would be sitting around 90, 95 watts, I think. Anyway, so yeah, like, the clocks are stupid low. The memory clock's not great either. Temperatures are decent. The cooling system on this thing is actually quite good, considering that it's a blower heatsink. I'm actually kind of impressed. So... yeah, but just awful. Just kind of awful in terms of performance. And our voltage throughout the test just kind of stays at 0.9 throughout the whole thing. So yeah, at this point we just get 22,748 points. Yeah, and if we look at our other core, then our other core, same thing, right? Like, it's not doing anywhere near 1200 megahertz. You know, just voltage is sitting super low for the duration of the tests. This graph is scaled awfully, but yeah. So voltage is sitting very low. Temperatures are fine, right? Because everything is power throttling like crazy. But the score definitely sucks as far as I'm concerned. This is kind of unfortunate because these things were really... there was a period of time when you could pick these up for like super cheap. Even like brand new. I got mine off of eBay with help from a very generous fan of AHOC who basically funded like more than half the cost of the card. But yeah. Anyway, this thing, like, this is slow. So we need to make it less slow. And the first thing we're going to be doing is just raising the power limits. And after that, we're going to actually start doing overclocking. So we're just going to get ATI flash. At this point, you can get a more up-to-date version of ATI flash. I'm just using whatever I had on my flash stick. We're going to delete those because those were my own backups of the BIOS. So we're going to use this script and this script, which, like, they're both the same thing. Like, you can see that I basically just copy pasted the file and then changed one value right there, which is just, this indicates to ATI Flash which BIOS to pull. So this is the primary BIOS, and this is the secondary BIOS. The card does, well, the BIOS for the second GPU core. It's a dual core GPU, so each core gets its own BIOS, but there's no dual BIOS functionality on the card, which is kind of unfortunate. Like 7990s or Radeon Pro Duos will actually have like a total of 4 BIOS chips on the PCB. This thing, I want to say, only has 2. I've just not bothered to check. There's no BIOS switch, so I'm going to assume there's only 2. Anyway, so those are the scripts that we're going to use to pull the BIOS. And if you're running ATI Flash on Windows 10, you're going to want to set the option to run this program as administrator. So now we're just going to run backup BIOS. It's going to do its thing. Press any key to continue. So there we got our first backup, and then we do our second backup. Let's enter, and at this point, you're gonna, like, just for good practice, you should make a folder. Backup, and save it there again. Okay, just so that you don't screw up your good BIOSes, because as far as I know, one of these BIOSes is not even on the Tech Power Up database currently. So if you have a Pro Duo or any card, like, don't rely on the Tech Power Up BIOS database, because if you're unlucky, the BIOS you need won't be there and you'll be screwed. So make your own backups and, like, save them in multiple places so that you don't accidentally overwrite your one backup, right? So it's kind of that. Might also be a good idea to, like, if you have a benchmarking operating system that you tend to break a lot, it might be a good idea to also save the backup BIOSes on a flash stick so that if you brick your install, you still have the backups, right? Anyway, well, you could recover them in other ways, but anyway. So at this point, the cool thing is we can just use Polaris BIOS editor to edit the BIOSes. So, yeah, and it gives us this warning, and I'm using some ancient, outdated version. I'm pretty sure I haven't downloaded a new version of Polaris BIOS editor since, like, the RX 580 came out or something. So at this point, you could probably find a more up-to-date version, but this one is fine for everything I want to do. We're just going to open that BIOS backup. It's going to give us this warning that it's unsupported device ID. Nobody cares. This is still a Polaris GPU, so everything works the way you'd expect it to. So here we have some fan control stuff. If you want to, like, this is your actual minimum. Well, so far I've basically been changing that one and that one at the same time. That's the only way I've found it that it actually works. Here we have our voltage control. Here we have our power limits. Right, so max power limit, current limit, power limit, and you'll notice that this is only 98 watts, and this is a 250 watt TDP card by spec. So essentially, there's like 98 watts per GPU core, and then the remaining 50 watts are for the memory, for all of the VRAM on the card. So that's what's going on with that. This card uses a pretty solid 4-phase VRM, so we're not going to be, you know. Like, I've done a PCB breakdown of this thing, so if you want to see that, you can just go watch that. If I remember to put a link in the description below, but, you know, you can probably find it yourself if you really want to see it. Well, we're just going to throw 200 in there. That's going to be perfectly fine, and 300 there. Now, the thing is this doesn't actually work out because the maximum voltage is, like, I don't know, 1150 millivolts or something. So if you do 200 times 115, so yeah, 1150 millivolts, it's not going to hit 300 watts, but who cares? Doesn't matter. And we're going to set that one to 300 watts as well. Changing these doesn't do anything because there's no overclocking support in the driver. Changing this to anything higher than, well, I tried 1.6 volts to see if I could get the memory to overclock better. That makes the thing lock up as soon as Windows initializes. I do believe there's, like, I'm not sure if it's causing instability, because it didn't really look like an OCP, because the screen went black instead of just complete hang, but well, the screen was still running, but it was just blacked out. Whereas if it was straight up over, well, not OCP, over voltage protection, it should just like black screen. Well, it would like stop putting out video, but didn't do that. But it still didn't work, so I wouldn't mess with that. Plus, as far as I'm pretty sure, these cards all come with Samsung GDDR5, and the like my experience with Samsung GDDR5 on RX 480s at least was that it doesn't scale at all with voltage. You don't need to do anything to it. So either way, we're just going to leave that alone. We're not going to worry about the fan settings, but if you wanted to mess with those, you could. But you can also, the other thing is you can just control the fan settings from the driver. So you kind of have both options, though you can't change the temperature limit from the driver. So you can do that in here, or you can set this lower. And what this does is the lower you set this, the sooner the fan will ramp up to the high PWM percentage. So if we set this to like 75 instead of 85, at 75 degrees, it'll ramp up to, it'll ramp the fan speed up faster. I've not actually validated that it does it exactly up to this speed right here, but that's the gist of how that works. Anyway, so at this point, we've taken care of everything we want here, for now at least. So we're going to save this one, and I do believe this is BIOS 1. I'm going to save that as BIOS 1. Save. And now we're going to open BIOS Backup Core 2. Yep. And we're going to just do the same thing. Also, the primary GPU, so the BIOS 1 core is the one in charge of the actual fan. So, or at least that one seems to get priority on the fan control. So we're going to do that. And at this point, we're going to have the power limit taken care of. BIOS 2, save. Yeah, now I have these scripts right here, which you can see is just ATI flash -P. That's the part that actually does anything. Everything else around it doesn't really, like, it's not important. And then we have for BIOS 2, same thing, just different adapter and different BIOS file name. So it's that. Also, like, this is something I do just to keep track of BIOSes when I'm flashing them, is you can change the version string right here to keep track of the BIOSes. So, I don't know, we're just going to go, like, power there. And you don't actually need to bother with fixing the checksum after doing this, because ATI Flash does it. Like, I think ATI Flash does it automatically for you, because I've never had a problem with not fixing the checksum myself. So anyway, so we have this one, and this is, and also this right here tells us if, like, this MS tells us this is the master. And if we open up BIOS 2, you'll see right here that SL, and that tells us that's the slave card, so that's the secondary core. So for this one, we're going to do the same thing, power, because we just lifted the power limit, we're going to save that. And now we're just going to do flash BIOS 1. And you do not want to have any monitoring software open while ATI Flash is running, okay? Like, if you have GPU-Z open or something, it'll actually cause a conflict with ATI Flash, and you can potentially, like, you can basically corrupt the BIOS as it's flashing, and you'll be screwed if you restart after doing that. Well, if you have a spare card, you'll be fine, but it's a hassle to deal with, you know, so... Not literally, you'll be like, you'll feel like an idiot type of screwed instead of like really, really screwed, right? So anyway, so that's flashed the first one. Now we flash the second one. Oh, this took 19 minutes. I'm really not very fast at doing things. I'm not doing this over again. Like, I've been flashing BIOSes to this card so much that I've been considering checking how many times you can overwrite a BIOS chip before it becomes a problem. Anyway, so now we can open up GPU-Z now that we're done with ATI flash, and you can see that we have power in our version string right there. And that is true for both of our cards. It's also, we can also see that we flashed, you know, the different BIOSes, because this one ends in 8329 for the slave BIOS, and the master BIOS ends in 8328. So that's that. So now we just restart. And at this point, it's also worth noting that you need to enable legacy PCIe device support, because we screwed it. Like, what I just did screws up the UEFI stuff. Can't remember what. But yeah, actually we'll go into the BIOS and I'll just point it out. Oh, too late. But basically, you do want to enable, like, well, like Asus motherboards will do it on their own, and they'll tell you that they've enabled the CSM compatibility mode. But on, like, this EVGA, like, I'm using the Z390 Dark here, and here I have to manually enable it, or the board refuses to recognize the card. So anyway, at this point, we removed the power limit, so we're just going to open up 2 instances of GPU-Z so that we can monitor all of the things that we care about. No, I didn't want to do that. Let's get card 2. Now if we run 3D Mark, it should go a lot faster, because we have no, well, effectively no power limit, because it's they're like on the stock settings, there's no way it's going to get even close to the power limit. So now we just run Firestrike. I mean, I do have another restart, so I'll show you the compatibility setting thing. Well, that's GT2 over. And see our score. We should have, yeah, we picked up some 3,000 points. So previously it was putting down 22,748. Now it puts out 25,804. So that's a pretty decent increase in score right there. I mean, let's grab a calculator. And 25,800 divided by, and I have it in the programmer calculator because I was well, for a bit I was doing some stuff manually, but as in with the HXD instead of Polaris BIOS editor, because I kind of forgot that thing exists, and then I was like, wait a minute, isn't there an easier way to do this than manually typing all the values in? And 22,700. Let's just round it up to 750. Why didn't that work? 25,800 divided by 2250. Oh, it's, yeah, cool. That's no. I didn't realize it would do that. Anyway. There. So that's a 13.4% performance increase. Great. Awesome. And we haven't even really overclocked it yet. So now it actually sits at 1243 the entire time on the core clock. Temperature is quite a bit higher because our power consumption is it's a lot higher, right? I mean, yeah, significantly higher power consumption, so significant, like the core clock is actually sustained, and we have a much higher peak temperature. In terms of voltages, we're looking at just a little over 1 volt. So, yep, that's pretty low, right? And that's for both cards. We're looking at the same thing, just over 1 volt for this one, 1243. And yeah, this core is cooler because that one's because this uses a blower heatsink. So basically, one of the GPU cores gets fresher air than the other. So yeah, one of them is always going to be running hotter than the other because basically the second core gets the exhaust of the first core. So that kind of sucks for the secondary core. But anyway, so that's. So just removing the power limit. So already we've picked up a good amount of performance, but we're not going to stop there. I mean, we can go a lot faster. So, yeah, sure. And now we're going to open my BIOS 1. And yeah, it's going to tell us that the checksum is invalid. But as you can see, that doesn't actually matter. Because if it actually mattered, I wouldn't be in Windows running Firestrike on a BIOS that I didn't fix the checksum on. So, at this point, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to copy over our memory timing strap, and we're just going to use the 1751. It could probably run the 1625, but I don't really want to test that right now. So we're just going to take that one, throw that one in there. So that's nice and convenient. Then we're going to go 2000 megahertz on that. Now, normally if you were overclocking a, well, I mean, here the thing is basically like your only concern is that it could crash before you get into Windows, in which case you're going to have to go into safe mode, uninstall the drivers, then fix the BIOS, then reinstall the drivers, do the signature signing again. I mean, disable the signature check again with ATI Pixel Clock Patcher, and just you basically. Because you can't adjust clocks from the operating system, recovering from any kind of issues sucks way more than it should. Also, well, you could also use a secondary, like a spare GPU to like boot on an NVIDIA card, flash the BIOS back to like a previous known good BIOS. But anyway, so I'm gonna do that. So here we were gonna just punch in 1200. We can't actually go above 1200. If you try to go above 1200, everything breaks horribly, as in the card will just crash immediately when you run any kind of workload. So at this point, we should be able to run like 1350. That's not a very high clock, but that should be sustainable. And 2000 megahertz on the core. And yeah, this thing should be now very hot and quite a bit faster. So now we're going to save that right over BIOS 1. Then we're going to open BIOS 2. Okay, yes. I'm going to copy that. There we go. Then we go 2000. Like, I've tested this card, like, I was running benchmarks with this card all the way up at, like, 2100, but, well, 2150 even. But, we're just gonna stay reasonable here, right? And if you do set these values too high, basically your main issue is just you're potentially not going to be able to get into Windows with this card as your primary. You're going to have to use a different card to get into Windows and flash the card, because it's going to crash as soon as the driver tries to load. if you, you know, set any of the values way too high. Now we're going to save BIOS 2, save right over it. So now we're going to go into ATI Flash, and I'm going to, again, add something to the version. So we're going to do T for timings, and then OC for overclocked, and that's BIOS 2. And then we're going to also do the same for BIOS 1, where we're just going to add TOC, timing overclock, and save that. And, I mean, if we open up GPU-Z right now, right, open up GPU-Z, there. So we're still on the power BIOS. Now we're going to run ATI Flash, so Flash BIOS 1. And you do have to do them, you know, you can't run them at the same time. Or at least I've not tried that, and I don't really want to find out if that doesn't work or not. I would suspect it doesn't work. So yeah, like the main issue with trying to overclock the Pro Duo is, as you can clearly see, the process is very slow and tedious because you can't change the clocks from the operating system. Or at least I don't know how to change the clocks from the operating system. If somebody out there knows how, I'd love to hear about it. But the thing is for BIOS modding for me in a lot of scenarios is kind of like a hammer. And the end result is that any problem where the driver doesn't want to let me overclock, well, it's a nail. So I'm going to hit it. I screwed that analogy up. Anyway, there. So now we flashed that. We can just check with GPU-Z that we overwrote both of them. So yeah, now we have TOC. And TOC on the second one as well. Now we restart. And at this point, I mean, we got 2,508, 25,800. So if you're on an EVGA motherboard, what you're gonna have to do is go to the boot menu, then go to the CSM configuration, and basically, normally it's going to be disabled. You're going to have to enable it and then use legacy mode if you're modding AMD GPU BIOSes. Now, as far as I know, there's actually a way to patch whatever it is that breaks when you just mod the BIOS and don't really do anything properly. But I've not really bothered looking into it because, I mean, I can just run, you know, the CSM here in legacy mode for the PCI, and it solves all of the boot up issues. So we're just going to hit escape and go straight into Windows. Yep. And at this point, you know, we can, if the card's getting too hot, we can still adjust the fan speed from Windows, but we can't really do anything about the clocks. So we can still mess with this. I'm gonna bump it up a bit. Honestly, 2,000 RPM is not that loud because, well, okay, like it's audible, but it's not, for me at least, it's not intolerable. Like I would tolerate it at like this configuration right here. Now something like this, not fun to listen to. We're just gonna bring that back down. We're gonna open up GPU-Z. Get 3D Mark up and running. Sensor, and Core 1, Core 2. Cool, both are set up. And now we just run Firestrike. And this is a really quite mild overclock, so I don't expect any instability. I've had the card over 1400 core, at which point it is pretty unstable though. and just barely finishes benchmarks, and requires a lot of fan speed to do it, because it gets really loud. I should check the power consumption on this thing when it's running at like these settings. Because it is technically like two RX 580s bolted together, and at this point it's even pushing the same kinds of clocks as two RX 580s, you know, put together, so it should pull roughly the same amount of power. Which would be probably around sort of 400 to 500 watts. I get the feeling we're going to finish this at like 80 plus degrees because the fan is actually ramping up. And I'm just going to hit escape. And... oh, no, just 70s. You know, well, that one hit 80, but still, you know, held up 1350 the entire time. And we've gotten to 28,537 points, which is atrocious. Like, 1080 Ti's are faster. Admittedly, this was for a period of time cheaper than a 1080 Ti, but most of the time these go for around $1,000. So, yeah. 28,537 points. So at this point, I think... right, not calendar, idiot. Calculator. There we go. This point, we've gone up from 28,537... from 22748. So yeah, that's a nice 25% more performance at the cost of, well, if you had it on water cooling, this would be doable. The issue is this is on an air cooler. Like, it's not too bad, but for, like, well, here we're just running short benchmarks. So yeah, if this ran for longer, then the cooler doesn't really have a chance. So, you know, maybe smashing 1200 millivolts into the core. I mean, you don't even get 1200 because there's a bunch of E-droop on these. But I think you get the idea, right? Like, you don't simply smash 1200 millivolts into the core on a card that even after we, like, because previously, after I just maxed out the power limit, it was still running around what, like 1.06 volts, right? Like, it was hovering around like 1.03, 1.06. Well, now it's doing way more. For 1350. It's kind of like I really wish I had a better cooling system on this at this point. But I was considering just cramming some water blocks under the shroud, but turns out that's not like there's not very many water blocks that fit under there, and the blocks that fit don't like they wouldn't like I wouldn't be able to also add fittings to them and everything while maintaining the shroud. So at this point I've just kind of resigned myself to, well, this is never going to run anything, you know, long duration, but yeah, still kind of a fun card to mess with. It's well, not fun to mess with, but that's how you overclock one of these, at least as well as I can do it. So yeah, sucks about the overclocking support in the drivers, just because if I had that like everything would be so much better. And also, I'm kind of annoyed by the fact that you can't raise the voltage even higher. I really wanted to see if I could do 1500 core at 1.3 volts, but or at least like 1.35, like, well, a lot more volts. However many volts it would require to do 1500 core, I would be willing to apply. Let's put it that way. Yeah, the only way to do that is with a physical voltage modification on the card, which I'm not entirely a fan of doing on a card. Well, I think it's mostly a matter of time. Eventually, I'm going to be bored, and I'm going to throw a volt mod on it anyway. Or I'm going to get my hands on, well, that's for, I'm not going to tease that right now. Anyway, so that's how you overclock a Pro Duo, and potentially any other AMD GPU that doesn't let you overclock from the driver. So primarily like the Pro Series cards where, you know, the driver just doesn't support overclocking at all. So you get Pixel Clock Patcher, you patch your BIOS, like you just patch everything because it doesn't really give you the option to choose, but it disables the BIOS signature check. If you don't disable the BIOS signature check, what essentially happens is you're going to get into Windows. Like for Windows 10, you're going to get into Windows and you're not going to have GPU drivers. And I think Windows 7 is going to do the same thing, or it might blue screen. One of the two. I'm not entirely sure. Like right now, you can see that we have Radeon Pro settings right there. I'm just going to show you what happens if you don't have this enabled. So we're going to press no. Wait, no, I wanted to press yes. So driver successfully restored. So now we have our, you know, all of our signatures, like the signature check re-enabled. So if we restart, we're not going to have the Radeon Pro control panel anymore, and the GPU is basically not going to be initialized because the AMD drivers will refuse to recognize it as a valid GPU. You can still use ATI flash without the drivers. It's just like if you don't patch the signature check, you end up with no drivers. They aren't running. So yeah, that's it for the video. Thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. If you have a suggestion about how to get the freaking card working on gaming drivers, I'd love to hear it. Like, seriously, I'd love to hear it because I am sick and tired of just flashing BIOSes on this thing so much. Like, honestly, this card is the reason why I set the compatibility option for ATI flash to be run as admin. I normally don't bother with that, but I've been flashing the BIOS so much today that it's just like, I mean, at this point, I save myself the time. Just keep it run as administrator all the time. Yeah, so if anybody knows better about how to deal with that, I'd love to hear it. Yeah, if you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I have a Patreon. There's Teespring where you can buy shirts, socks, posters, stickers. You can find links to both down in the description below. Yeah, those do help out immensely because they fund purchases like, you know, AMD workstation cards just because they have 2 GPU cores, and I'm a sucker for cards with 2 GPU cores. So that's it. Thanks for watching, and I'm gonna hit the stop button now. Where is it?